And in April, he told Politico, "Devaluing, of course, is a scary word, but what it really means is American exports become cheaper." Now, to be fair to Trump, there is a relatively widespread consensus that the dollar is indeed overvalued. The IMF reckons that the dollar is overvalued by about 10%, and it's been consistently strengthening against other currencies, with the so-called broad dollar index increasing by 25% over the past 2 decades. This is despite the fact that the U.S. usually runs pretty hefty trade deficits, i.e., it imports more than it exports, which should entail a weaker currency. So why is the dollar overvalued? Well, the main reason is its status as the world's reserve currency. In other words, the currency that central banks and financial institutions like to hold in reserve because it's considered safe. This creates more demand for dollars internationally, artificially inflating its value. So why does Trump actually want to devalue it? After all, at first glance, having an overvalued currency sounds like an advantage, and it's something that America's adversaries, including Russia and China, regularly complain about. An overvalued currency means that you get to import more than you otherwise could, and the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is one of the reasons that the U.S. can unilaterally impose such punishing financial sanctions. But while there are clearly some advantages, over the past few years, some commentators have started wondering whether this might actually be a bad thing. The main downside is that an overvalued currency makes your exports less competitive internationally, which is especially bad news for your manufacturing base, which struggles to export and is often undercut by cheaper imports. This is the argument made by both Trump and Vance. In his Bloomberg interview, Trump claimed, "I've been talking to manufacturers. No one wants to buy our products because it's too expensive." Vance described the dollar's reserve status as a massive tax on American producers. In fact, today, there's a relatively widespread consensus that the dollar's reserve status has contributed to America's deindustrialization. As politicians have become increasingly keen on rebuilding America's manufacturing base, they've started questioning the dollar's reserve status. American politicians also often attribute China's economic success to its practice of deliberately devaluing its currency, which has kept exports competitive and protected its industrial base. At the same time, other countries have started pushing back against the dollar's reserve status as the U.S. has ramped up its use of financial sanctions. But regardless, can Trump actually devalue the dollar? Well, before we get into how he might actually do it, it's worth noting that most of Trump's other economic policies would actually result in a stronger, not weaker, dollar. His famous tariffs, for instance, would probably result in a stronger dollar for two reasons. Firstly, most people think that tariffs would result in higher inflation, which would prompt the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. Higher interest rates usually mean a more valuable currency, because it makes it more attractive to save in that currency. This dynamic would be exacerbated by proposed tax cuts, which would also stoke inflation by increasing disposable income. Secondly, countries like China might respond to tariffs by further devaluing their currencies, which would effectively push up the value of the dollar, given that its value is defined relative to other currencies. This is actually why the dollar has appreciated since Trump's victory, as investors began to bet on high tariffs and therefore a stronger dollar. Trump has also made it clear that he wants to maintain the dollar's reserve status, threatening to impose 100% tariffs on countries that, quote, leave the dollar, and telling the Economic Club of New York that, quote, losing the world currency would be the equivalent of losing a war.